Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that digs into the research, the articles, the sources, and we pull out the key insights just for you.
And today, we're really diving deep into someone quite unique in the tech world, Eric Schmidt. His decisions, they didn't just shape Google.
No, not at all. They arguably set the stage for, well, for how technology looks today, right?
Exactly.
So here's something to think about. Imagine you get this offer, almost unbelievable. You're asked to lead this up-and-coming company, one that's clearly going places, going to redefine how billions of people live, work, connect, the whole deal.
A future titan.
A future titan that by 2025 is worth trillions of dollars. And you're paid for doing this.
Let me guess, not much.
$1, a single dollar a year.
Wow, okay.
It sounds like fiction, doesn't it? Like a myth.
It really does.
But that was Eric Schmidt's reality at Google, CEO for that really crucial decade.
And from that $1, his own fortune ended up being what, around $32 billion by 2025?
Exactly. $32 billion, according to Bloomberg, in May 2025. So that contrast, that jump from $1 to billions, it just screams the question we need to tackle today.
Yeah. How did he do that?
How did Eric Schmidt manage to rewrite the rules so effectively that Google just seemed unstoppable? And how did he become such a key part of that massive success?
It's a fantastic starting point, that paradox, because Schmidt, he wasn't your standard Silicon Valley CEO, especially for a place like Google.
Right.
His time there, 2001 to 2011, it wasn't just about managing a search engine. He was more like the architect.
The architect behind its transformation.
Absolutely. From this brilliant search idea into this huge global tech empire, the $2 trillion company you mentioned for 2025. And the really interesting part, the thing that makes you go, aha, is what you said. He wasn't a coder. He didn't invent Google search.
Not the founder type.
Not the founder type, not the Steve Jobs showman type either. So how does someone like that, without the usual credentials, have such a massive impact? That's where his story gets really different.
Precisely. And that's where his unique approach, his core differentiator really comes through. It flew in the face of conventional wisdom, really.
How so?
Well, think about it. Most CEOs then and now, they're obsessed with quarterly results, right? The bottom line, next quarter's earnings.
And their own pay packages. Multi-million.
Huge pay packages.
Yeah.
Schmidt, he was making these incredibly long-term bets, and he actually turned down the big salaries, opted for that $1 a year.
Which wasn't just modesty, you're saying.
Not at all. It was this deep belief, almost unshakable, that real wealth and maybe more importantly, real power, systemic power, it doesn't come from a paycheck.
It comes from ownership, equity.
Exactly. Long-term ownership. It was a completely different game than everyone else was playing, in this world obsessed with instant results.
It really was. And this deep dive, well, it's your way into understanding that game. Understanding the long-term mindset of, I think, one of Silicon Valley's most important but maybe least understood figures. So today, we're going to unpack how he reshaped Google's leadership, which was just as unusual as that dollar salary.
We'll look at those early bets, right? Android, YouTube, they seemed crazy at the time.
Totally audacious. We'll look at the thinking behind them. And then why even now, in 2025, his influence goes way beyond tech companies.
Right into global policy. AI strategy.
Exactly. Shaping things at the highest levels.
Okay, so if you want to understand how this quiet strategy built a trillion-dollar company and then shifted to influencing global power, you're definitely in the right place. Let's dive in.
All right, let's unpack this first piece. It's really foundational. Eric Schmidt's financial mindset. And like you said, it's not just a fun fact about his pay.
No, it's a whole philosophy. It shaped how Google worked, top to bottom.
Think about 2004. Huge year for Google. The IPO is looming. And Schmidt does something that it floored Wall Street.
Right, he goes to the board.
And he doesn't ask for more money. He asked them to cut his salary. Cut it. From $250,000, which was decent.
Perfectly respectable for the time. Down to $1. Just $1. No bonuses, no perks, nothing.
Just the dollar.
Can you imagine the reaction now if a major CEO did that? It was completely out of left field.
Especially when other tech CEOs were pulling in tens of millions.
Yeah.
Salary, bonuses, stock options, the works.
They were negotiating for private jets, golden parachutes. Schmidt asks for basically nothing up front.
It definitely wasn't humility, though.
Yeah.
Or just a PR stunt.
No.
This was a calculated move, really strategic. It showed his whole philosophy. He wasn't after immediate cash. Why? Because cash has limits.
What did he want then?
You wanted long-term control, leverage, compounding leverage. He just knew with this absolute certainty that real wealth, lasting influence,
Mm.
it doesn't come from the annual paycheck.
Which is tied to quarterly results, often volatile.
Exactly. Wealth, the kind he was after, is built quietly, patiently, through owning equity, owning a piece of the future.
It's the opposite of how most exec comp works, isn't it? Which is all about hitting those short-term numbers.
Completely. He flipped the script. Cash buys you comfort now, sure, but equity buys you power later. Future power.
And the timing. He did this in 2004.
The IPO year.
The exact same year Google went public, the IPO price was $85 a share. Seems incredibly low now, right?
Almost quaint.
But here's the kicker, the genius part. Schmidt already held millions of shares as CEO.
So the $250K salary he gave up
Was peanuts compared to the value of his stock, which was about to explode.
Right. Fast forward to 2025. Google, now Alphabet, has had stock splits. Incredible growth.
Market cap over $2.2 trillion.
Insane numbers. And the result for Schmidt, that $32 billion net worth we mentioned, May 2025, built not from salary, but from that long-term ownership bet.
It really was a masterclass in the quiet power move. Maybe the public didn't fully get it, but Silicon Valley surely noticed.
Oh, absolutely. Think about how other execs operate. They fight for raises, bonuses, always justifying their worth based on recent performance.
Under pressure from shareholders for those short-term results.
Exactly. Schmidt, he just sidestepped all that.
Yeah.
He deliberately traded that immediate income for massive long-term leverage.
And that $1 salary gave him huge political capital inside Google, too, didn't it? Harder to criticize him for short-term stock dips.
Precisely. It insulated him. This whole thing, it created one of the most amazing CEO to billionaire stories ever. And it highlights that massive difference between just earning money and strategically owning the future.
A lesson many still miss.
Definitely.
And it wasn't just about his own bank account, was it?
No, not primarily. That financial decision, it signaled something bigger. It was like the core blueprint for how Google would operate.
How it would grow, hire, invest.
Yeah. It's in the message. We're playing the long game here. We value patience, long-term vision over quick wins. We're willing to make big bets that might take years to pay off.
It set the tone for everything. Hiring, acquisitions, the works.
Absolutely. And that ownership-first long-term view, it directly fed into how he structured the leadership team.
Because if you're not chasing quarterly numbers tied to your bonus,
you can afford to be more patient, more experimental with how you build your team. You can try unconventional things.
Which leads us perfectly into the next big idea, this unique leadership model, the Triarchy. 3 at the helm.
Right. So when Schmidt came to Google in 2001, you have to remember the context, he wasn't hired to replace Larry Page and Sergey Brin.
The brilliant, but maybe slightly chaotic founders.
Exactly. The board actually brought him in, and they said this explicitly, to protect them from themselves.
Wow, that's quite a mandate. Suggests things were a bit turbulent.
It really does. The board was genuinely concerned. Larry and Sergey, undeniably brilliant, visionary even, but also strong-willed, opinionated.
And known to clash.
Famously. Over big fundamental stuff. Product direction, hiring, strategy, real disagreements. Investors were actually worried the whole thing might just implode from internal conflict.
Despite the potential.
Despite the huge potential. So Schmidt, with his experience from Novell, Sun Microsystems, he was the adult supervision, basically.
The stabilizer.
The stabilizer.
Yeah.
But the challenge was, how do you bring stability without killing the magic, without being the traditional boss?
So instead of just taking over like a typical CEO, imposing hierarchy, he proposed something really, well, radical for the time.
The triumvirate.
Yeah, this idea that he, Larry, and Sergey would share power equally. 3 minds, 1 mission.
Which was totally against the grain in Silicon Valley. And really, corporate America, the CEO is usually the king, right?
The unquestioned leader. This model just threw that playbook out the window.
And within this triumvirate, they developed this idea, so Schmidt really pushed, constructive conflict.
Meaning disagreement wasn't bad.
It was essential, necessary even. Every big decision, launching Gmail, hiring key people, making an acquisition, they debated it intensely. The 3 of them.
So authority wasn't top-down.
No, it came from alignment, understanding, consensus eventually. It meant they looked at things from all angles, challenged assumptions. The solutions ended up being way more robust than if one person just decided.
Like the decision to build Chrome. That was probably debated heavily.
You bet it was. But the process allowed for that debate, and they made the call together.
And to make that collaboration work, to make sure it wasn't just the most senior person winning arguments.
They brought in the no hippios rule.
No, highest paid person's opinion. Love that acronym.
It's great, isn't it? And the impact was huge, especially as Google was growing so fast.
How so?
It explicitly said, decisions here are based on data, evidence, the merit of the idea, not ego, not rank, not how much you earn.
So a junior engineer with data could actually win an argument against a VP.
Absolutely. That was the goal. It created a real meritocracy of ideas, allowed the best concepts to surface no matter who thought of them. It stopped rank from killing innovation.
And did this unusual model actually work? I mean, scaling with 3 people sharing power sounds potentially messy.
You'd think so, but the results speak for themselves. Google went from, 200 employees in 2001 when Schmidt started,
Tiny startup.
to over 50,000 by 2011 when he stepped down as CEO. A giant. And that core decision-making structure, the triumvirate, it held together and worked remarkably well through all that explosive growth.
So it wasn't just a quirk, it was a real innovation in leadership.
Definitely. It became a kind of blueprint. Other companies like Facebook, even Apple sometimes, looked at it, adapted parts of it. It showed you could scale rapidly without rigid command and control.
It was more collaborate in scale.
Exactly. A new standard for fast-growing tech firms trying to stay agile and innovative.
And it was this collective brain, this data-driven approach that let Google make those huge, future-defining bets.
The ones that seemed crazy to almost everyone else at the time.
Okay, which takes us right into maybe the most compelling part of Schmidt's playbook. His relentless focus on the long term. Betting on the unthinkable.
Yeah, this is where his genius really shows. He didn't just think ahead, he thought, as some sources say, ridiculously far ahead.
Well, competitors were sweating the quarterly numbers.
He was asking these massive foundational questions, like, where's the internet really going in the next 10 years? Or what tech will we kick ourselves for not buying today?
And these weren't just thoughts, they became actual strategy.
Directly. His answers led to the bets that basically defined the modern internet. They turned Google from just search into this whole ecosystem.
Let's look at Android. That was 2005, right?
Yep, 2005. Google quietly buys this little startup, Android Inc., for maybe $50 million. Seemed like pocket change, almost.
But you got to remember the context back then. Mobile was Nokia land, BlackBerry town.
Symbian, BlackBerry OS, Windows Mobile. Those were the big players, the incumbents.
So analysts look at Google, a search company, buying a mobile OS startup.
And they just scratched their heads. Dismissed it. Irrelevant. Why would Google risk getting into hardware, into operating systems? They couldn't see past Nokia and BlackBerry.
An expensive hobby, they called it.
Pretty much. They totally missed the potential of an open source platform.
And look what happened. Fast forward to 2025.
Android runs over 70% of smartphones worldwide.
70%. It's not just dominant, it's everywhere.
It's the most used operating system in history, by far, powering everything from top-tier phones to cheap ones in developing countries.
So that wasn't a bet on a trend, it was a bet on, inevitability.
Exactly. A bet that mobile would become the main way humans interact with tech. Schmidt saw that shift coming, saw the power of open versus closed way before most others did.
Okay, then just a year later, 2006, another huge controversial buy.
YouTube, for $1.65 billion.
And the reaction was not positive.
Oh, it was scathing. Wall Street, the media, they scoffed. Called it the cat video platform.
Right, I remember that.
Argued Google massively overpaid for, essentially, a website hosting amateur videos with huge legal risks around copyright and uncertain ways to make money.
They focused on the silly videos, not the platform itself.
Totally missed the forest for the trees.
But Schmidt saw something different.
He did. He looked past the cat videos and saw the future of content distribution, globally.
He saw video becoming the web's main language.
Exactly. And YouTube was positioned perfectly to be the channel for that. He saw the shift from passive TV to active, user-generated, on-demand video.
And again, fast forward to 2025, has that vision panned out?
Absolutely, completely. YouTube's valued over $400 billion now, makes tens of billions a year in ads. And get this, it's the second biggest search engine online.
Only behind Google search itself.
Incredible, right? It's a cultural force, an economic powerhouse, a global information source, more than just videos.
So these bets, Android, YouTube, they weren't just lucky guesses.
Not at all. They came from this core Schmidt belief. If it's obvious, it's already too late.
Meaning you can't just follow the crowd?
Right. Don't chase the hype. Don't jump on trends after they're already big. Instead, identify the fundamental unstoppable shifts in tech and behavior, the inevitable things.
Like the internet going mobile?
Then Google needed Android.
Like video becoming the web's language?
Then Google needed YouTube. That mindset, Betting on inevitability was crucial. It's what turned Google from just search into this sprawling digital empire built on these foundational pillars.
And it wasn't just what he bet on, but also what he didn't chase, right?
Right.
Resisting temptation.
Exactly. And that long-term focus, that impact-driven thinking, it shaped his whole leadership style, which was all about power, but without needing the spotlight.
Yeah. Let's talk about that leadership philosophy, power without spotlight. Because Schmidt was so different from the typical tech celebrity CEO.
Totally different.
Yeah.
He actively avoided the limelight, no dramatic keynotes, no constant media presence. He wasn't the face of Google like Jobs was for Apple or Musk is for Tesla.
It's true. Back in, say, 2008, Google's huge already, but most people wouldn't recognize Schmidt if they passed him on the street.
And that was intentional. He cultivated that relative anonymity.
Why do that? Most CEOs want the recognition.
Because for Schmidt, it wasn't about personal branding. It was about building systems, robust, durable systems that would outlast any one person.
He saw personal celebrity as maybe a distraction?
Yeah, potentially a distraction, maybe fostering a cult of personality that makes the company too dependent on one individual. While others were chasing magazine covers, he was quietly making these huge long-term decisions to strengthen Google's foundations.
Building the machine, not just being the driver.
Exactly. He wanted the company, the culture, to thrive on its own, regardless of who was getting the public attention. Let the work speak for itself.
And this tied into his core belief about what a leader actually does.
Right. It wasn't about micromanaging or being the smartest person on every topic. It was about enabling the right people, putting them in positions to do their best work, to unleash their own genius.
Moving from commanding to enabling.
Precisely. And he had that great quote that sums it up. Leadership is not about knowing everything. It's about knowing who knows.
That's really profound. It changes leadership from being the all-knowing boss.
You being the conductor of an orchestra of experts, trusting distributed intelligence, not just your own, building a network of competence.
And how did that play out in practice at Google, especially during that crazy growth?
Well, he built structures for it. He empowered product teams, gave them real autonomy, let them run like mini startups inside Google.
Giving them ownership.
Huge ownership.
Mm-hmm.
He famously trusted the engineers, often prioritizing their data-driven insights over maybe traditional executive opinions, because he knew Google's strength was its engineering talent.
And he encouraged disagreement. Didn't just tolerate it.
Actively encouraged it. He saw debate, argument backed by data, even a bit of friction, as vital for innovation. It was the antidote to bureaucracy, to groupthink. He wanted the best ideas to fight their way to the top.
Okay, then comes 2011. Google is absolutely dominant. Most CEOs would be digging in, cementing their legacy.
Holding on tight.
But Schmidt does the almost unthinkable. He steps down as CEO voluntarily.
And hands the reins back to Larry Page, the co-founder.
And what's amazing is there was no drama, no scandal, no power struggle reported.
Clarity. He felt his main job, stabilizing and structuring the company for massive growth, was done. The company was mature, stable, and the founders were ready. He built the systems they needed.
That's incredible self-awareness, real stewardship.
It really is. It's become this classic example of quiet leadership. It's studied now in business schools. How do you build something that can truly run without you? That's the holy grail for many leaders.
And he didn't just vanish after stepping down.
No, he transitioned. First to executive chairman, then a technical advisor role. Still involved, but subtly guiding those ambitious moonshots.
AI, robotics, cloud.
Yeah, the really cutting-edge stuff.
Oh.
But without needing the credit, without being front and center. His influence remained, just shifted to a more strategic, behind-the-scenes role. The quiet hand on the tiller.
And then, just when you thought maybe his main influence was winding down, maybe he just enjoyed the billions.
He steps onto an entirely new stage. Bigger, arguably more globally significant than even Google.
Right, which brings us to his later phase. Power thinking. Moving from leading Google to shaping global AI strategy. And let's be clear, he didn't just retire.
Not in any conventional sense. When he left his executive role at Google Alphabet in 2017, sure, maybe some thought he'd fade away, do philanthropy, sail off into the sunset.
Enjoy the $32 billion.
Right. But Schmidt, he was repositioning, pivoting, moving from building search engines and operating systems,
Which is already monumental.
to shaping the future of global intelligence itself. The whole AI revolution. That became his focus.
And this wasn't just writing opinion pieces. This was serious national-level stuff.
Dead serious. In 2018, the U.S. government taps him to lead the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. the NSCAI.
What was its mission? Sounds important.
Critically important. Its job was basically to get America ready for a future defined by AI warfare, cyber dominance, new kinds of digital diplomacy, fierce global competition, high stakes.
So what did he do there?
For 3 intense years, he worked with everyone. Military generals, top engineers from academia and industry, ethicists, foreign policy experts. He talked to the Pentagon leaders, testified before Congress.
And he had a clear message.
A stark one. He kept warning about China's rapid AI progress, urging the U.S. to commit serious funding. He specifically asked for at least $40 billion just to maintain its lead. He basically said, this is the new strategic high ground, and we can't afford to fall behind.
Framing it almost like a new kind of arms race.
In many ways, yes. An AI arms race.
And he wasn't just advising. He put his own money where his mouth was, right? With Schmidt Futures.
Exactly. In 2021, he launches Schmidt Futures. It's described as a philanthropic tech think tank, but it's very active.
Investing in.
Pouring hundreds of millions of his own dollars into really cutting-edge stuff. Quantum computing aiming for that next leap in processing power. AI safety, trying to ensure AI develops beneficially for humans. Next-gen infrastructure building the foundations for future tech. It's strategic investment, not just charity.
So by now, 2025, he's not just influencing companies. He's shaping national strategies.
Absolutely. He's become this unique bridge, connecting Silicon Valley innovation with Washington, D.C. power, connecting algorithms with accountability, connecting raw tech power with international strategy and security.
That's a rare position to occupy.
Incredibly rare.
Yeah.
His network now is just immense. The White House, DARPA, NATO tech councils, the frontier AI labs. He's in all those conversations, often guiding them, not just watching, actively shaping.
And the motivation behind this later career phase, it doesn't seem like it's about staying famous or getting richer.
No, it seems much deeper. It feels like it's about responsibility. Recognizing the immense power of the technologies he helped build and feeling a duty to help manage their impact on society and the world.
A sense of stewardship for the future AI will create.
I think so. And he had that quote which sounds almost prophetic now. The next revolution won't be industrial. It will be cognitive, and we better be ready.
That captures it perfectly. Seeing the shift to mental augmentation and understanding the massive strategic implications.
So yeah, history will remember him as Google's CEO, the guy who oversaw its incredible growth. But maybe, just maybe, his ultimate legacy will be as the strategist who really understood how to turn long-term tech thinking into long-term global power. One of the first to see AI, not just as a product, but as a national strategic imperative.
Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive on Eric Schmidt, let's just recap what made him so unique. Because remember, he wasn't the founder.
Didn't write the code.
Wasn't the flashy visionary like a Jobs or a Musk. His genius was different.
Deeper, maybe?
Yeah.
More subtle. It was this ability to guide the visionaries, Larry and Sergey, without overshadowing them, without letting his ego get in the way.
Understanding that real, lasting power isn't always about being the loudest or most visible.
It's about being the most strategic presence within the system, enabling things. He really was the billionaire who saw it in decades, not just quarters.
And his journey, that $1 salary to $32 billion, it offers some powerful lessons, doesn't it?
Absolutely. First, leadership isn't just about being loud. It's about that strategic presence, influencing the system, enabling others.
Second, he didn't chase headlines. He chased alignment. Getting the strategy right, building the system, that mattered more than short-term praise.
Third, he didn't just talk future. He bet on it, consistently. Big contrarian bets like Android and YouTube, committing real resources.
And fourth, that 10-year vision, seeing clearly what was coming when everyone else was stuck on the next 10 weeks. Mobile, video, AI's geopolitical impact. He saw them early.
So what's the takeaway for you, listening to this? How can you apply Schmidt's blueprint?
Well, first, don't confuse being busy with being impactful. Schmidt made fewer, bigger moves, multipliers. Are your actions just activity, or are they genuinely creating leverage, compounding over time?
Think about that. Are you creating multipliers? Second, maybe rethink chasing short-term rewards. Applause, a quick promotion, the easy win. Schmidt traded that for long-term authority and influence with his $1 salary decision.
It wasn't humility, it was strategy.
Brilliant strategy. What short-term things might you be holding on to that limit your long-term potential? What could you trade now for bigger ownership later?
And third, that counterintuitive lesson. Sometimes stepping back is the best way to step up.
Schmidt left the CEO role when Google was strong, ready to run without him. True stewardship,
It's not giving up, it's strategic detachment for growth. Are you maybe holding on too tight to something that needs space to flourish on its own?
Look, you might not run a trillion-dollar company. No one might offer you a job for $1.
That's not the point.
Exactly. The real question Schmidt's story leaves us with is this. Are you building your life, your career, around short-term reactive 10-day goals?
Or are you driven by powerful, well-thought-out 10-year visions?
Is your next move just putting out a fire? Or is it a deliberate piece of a larger system you're consciously building?
Because if you really want to lead, to own your future, not just earn a living, and to build something that lasts, not just peaks, then maybe it's time to shift your focus. Stop optimizing just for this month, this quarter. Start intentionally designing your decade.
Let Schmidt's journey be that mirror. Rethink what you're chasing. And remember his ultimate insight, maybe the most valuable thing you can earn.
Is time spent wisely.
Exactly.
That's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time.